The SEALs had stopped shouting. Not because the fight was over, because it wasn't worth shouting anymore. 200 enemies above them, ammunition gone, and radio silence so thick it felt like the air itself had died. Then through the smoke, one sound cut clean through the chaos. A single shot that didn't belong to anyone left alive. Heads turned toward the ridge no one believed was manned. The sky went quiet. You're watching StoryScape, cinematic war stories about the unseen heroes who change everything. If you love stories where silence speaks louder than commands, stay to the end. The valley was burning under a sun that refused to move. Heat shimmered across shattered stone, every gust of wind dragging the smell of gunpowder through the canyon like a warning that wouldn't fade. The SEALs were pinned for hours, low on ammunition, high on fear, and boxed in by ridges that spat fire from every direction. Their radios hissed with static, no air support, no orders, just silence and dust. Chief Morales crouched behind a broken wall, his hands trembling as he reloaded the same half-empty magazine for the 5th time. The man beside him was pale, whispering prayers into the dirt. Morales didn't stop him. Even prayers sounded like gunfire out here. Across the canyon, the enemy's PKM hammered again, tearing sparks from the rocks and forcing the team deeper into cover. The air was hot enough to taste. Every breath felt borrowed. Then, through the chaos, came a sound that didn't belong to this battlefield. One clean rifle shot, flat, distant, absolute. The PKM stopped mid-burst, and for the first time all day, silence felt heavier than noise. Morales froze, listening. "That wasn't ours," someone muttered. Morales didn't answer. He was already searching the horizon for something he couldn't see. Sometimes the loudest thing on a battlefield is the absence of sound. A kilometer away, hidden beneath a veil of heat, Cross adjusted the scope of a rifle that shouldn't have worked anymore. The stock was scratched, the barrel scarred, but she had rebuilt it piece by piece, the way others rebuild faith. She wasn't supposed to be here. Command had grounded her months ago after an extraction that went wrong. She had come anyway, alone, unlisted, unwelcome, because she couldn't stand listening to men die when she still had bullets left to spend. Through her scope, the valley shimmered like water. The SEALs below were scattered, crawling through dust that refused to stay still. The enemy moved in patterns, confident and careless. Cross studied their rhythm. The loader who leaned too far left, the spotter who never blinked before firing, the commander who believed distance made him untouchable. She lined him up first, adjusted for wind, and pressed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and the echo came back like a heartbeat. Down below, the commander collapsed before he could shout a name.
Morales saw it happen and didn't believe it. One shot, one change in gravity. He didn't know who had fired, only that someone, somewhere, had decided they weren't done yet. "Eyes on the ridge," he whispered, scanning the shimmering skyline. Nothing. Just heat and light pretending to be mountains. Cross breathed through the recoil, her heartbeat syncing with the rifle's rhythm. The next target appeared, a machine gunner scrambling for the fallen weapon. She fired again. The sound folded into the wind, quick and final. Morales' team began to move, their bodies learning how to believe again. Hope doesn't march, it hides, waits, and fires when it must. Cross shifted her position, dragging her rifle across the rock, her elbows bleeding from the heat. Through her scope, she caught a flicker near the hut at the edge of the valley. 2 silhouettes bending over a mortar tube. Professionals, not amateurs. They were setting up to erase what was left of Morales' team. She adjusted the scope, slowed her breathing, and sent a round straight through the center of their plan. The explosion died before it began. Below, Morales exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath for minutes. "Whoever you are, he murmured toward the ridge. "Keep doing it." His voice barely carried, but Cross didn't need to hear it. She could already read the change in their movements, the way panic turned to purpose. The valley once owned by chaos now answered to precision. As she reloaded, the world tilted. A glint flashed high on the opposite ridge, metal catching light at an angle too deliberate to ignore. It wasn't debris, it was glass, a scope. Someone else was hunting. Cross stayed still, her finger frozen against the trigger. She had revealed her position to save them. Now the mountain was staring back. The SEALs began their push, unaware that the hunter who'd saved them was already in another sniper's crosshairs. The glint came again, brief, sharp, deliberate. Cross adjusted her focus, but the mirage swallowed it whole, turning distance into illusion. The air between ridges quivered with heat, disguising movement as shimmer and shimmer as movement. Her instincts didn't care. Every nerve along her spine had already decided someone was watching her through glass. She lowered her cheek to the stock, letting the world compress into the circular edge of the scope. Her rifle was quiet now, patient. The reticle swept left, tracing where light had bitten the rock. Nothing but sand. She swept right. A shadow lingered too long before disappearing. The other sniper was good, experienced, calm, unwilling to waste a first shot. She could almost feel him calculating the same wind, the same angle, the same math she was running in her head. Below, Morales moved his team along the dry riverbed. Unaware, the sky had turned into a duel between ghosts. 2-by-2 movement, he ordered, voice low but steady. The men advanced from cover to cover, their boots crushing shards of rock that still smoked from earlier impacts. He felt safer now, though he didn't know why. Maybe it was faith. Maybe it was denial. Hope has a way of sounding like strategy when you whisper it enough times. Cross knew they were moving directly into exposure. The opposing sniper would see the same movement she did, a trail of dark silhouettes across pale stone, predictable and slow. She couldn't let him have the first shot. She retracted slightly from her scope, rolling to her right until the rifle kissed a different angle. The slope beneath her knees was narrow, slick with grit. One wrong shift, and gravity would end her faster than a bullet. You can't fight an unseen enemy. You can only outweight them. The first round came without sound. She felt it before she heard it. A low hiss, a vibration through the rock, the air splitting past her shoulder and carving dust into her cheek. Instinct threw her flat. A second shot followed, closer, breaking a stone edge beside her face and sending a spray of shards into her neck. Her ears rang, but she didn't move. Movement is what snipers feed on. Stillness is how they starve. She counted the seconds between shots. 2.4. Professional rhythm. Same training she once had. That meant bolt action, steady breathing, same hand discipline. She closed her eyes briefly, mapping the sound against the slope. His position had to be higher, West Ridge maybe 200 meters above her own. That meant he had light advantage, but less cover. Good. Sunlight betrays pride. Cross slid backward, inch by inch, dragging her rifle into shadow. The next round cracked where her head had been. She didn't flinch. Her pulse had slowed to the same rhythm as her trigger hand. She waited until the echo faded, then lifted the rifle just enough to find the glint again. There, between two slivers of basalt, a reflection trembled like a heartbeat. She didn't aim at it. She aimed at the fraction of darkness beside it, where a face might hide. The recoil knocked dust loose from her elbow. The rock across the valley spat red for a second before the mirage reclaimed it. Silence. She stayed still, listening. 10 seconds. 15. No return shot. A faint ripple of movement behind the same ridge. Then nothing. She'd clipped him. Not dead, but wounded enough to think twice. The duel was over. For now. Down below, Morales' squad pushed forward, closing distance to the hut Cross had cleared minutes ago. One of the SEALs, Lane, looked back toward the ridge and gave a small nod, as if thanking a god he couldn't name. Morales caught the gesture. "Focus ahead," he said. "Whoever's covering us, she's already done her part." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed the done part. Some wars end when the shooting stops. Others only begin once you're seen. Cross used the brief calm to assess her position. She lost half her ammo, her throat was raw from breathing through grit, her left arm numb from recoil. But her mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in years. The adrenaline felt clean, earned. It reminded her why she had ever stayed in uniform, not for glory, not even for orders, but for moments like this, when silence could mean survival for someone else. Then the radio at her belt, silent since dawn, crackled once, a burst of static, then a voice, broken and thin. "Unknown Overwatch, identify." She froze. That voice belonged to command. They'd finally noticed her. But so had someone else, because through the scope she saw new movement on the western flank. Not one, not two, 5 targets, coordinated, closing in toward Morales' men with precision too clean to be local militia. Reinforcements. Cross flipped her safety off, chambered a fresh round, and angled her body into position. She had maybe 20 seconds before the SEALs were caught in open ground. She whispered to no one, "Not today," and set her sights. The command radio was still asking for her name, but Cross didn't have time to answer, because through the heat haze, she just saw one of the incoming soldiers raise a launcher toward the riverbed where Morales stood. The next shot wouldn't be fired from a rifle. It would erase the valley. The launcher appeared only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. The soldier shouldered it with a calmness that terrified her. No hesitation, no flare of panic, just trained precision. The kind of precision that kills teams, not individuals. The SEALs below were still moving, exposed across the dry riverbed, unaware they were seconds from being vaporized into history. She didn't think, she didn't have time to. Her rifle wasn't built for anti-armor fire, not at this range, but she knew timing, and timing had a way of humbling weapons. She inhaled once and measured the wind through instinct alone. The air was thick, trembling from the heat of gunfire and the rising thermal currents off the rock. Her left eye caught the shimmer of the launcher tube, aligning with the horizon. It was already locked. She pressed her cheek deeper into the stock, her pulse climbing until every beat became a countdown. There was no angle, no chance, just a decision. She fired.
The bullet tore through distance faster than logic could object. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the launcher's firing pins sparked, and the explosion bloomed too close to its owner. A flare of white and red shattered across the ridge, swallowing the operator and the 2 men beside him. The blast wave rolled through the valley, pushing dust outward in a slow-motion wave that felt biblical. Morales and his team hit the ground as burning fragments scattered over them like confetti made of steel. When they looked up again, the western ridge was gone, smoke where stone used to be. Cross lay still, the recoil having slammed her shoulder deep into the rock. Her hearing was nothing but pressure and ringing now, as if she were underwater. She tried to breathe, but found her lungs full of grit. She had saved them, but something felt wrong. Her hand trembled when she tried to cycle the bolt. Blood ran down her forearm from a shard that had cut through her sleeve. She ignored it. The rifle jammed halfway through the next round, bolt sticking stubbornly. She tapped it, once, twice, then slammed it open with the heel of her hand. It chambered again, reluctantly. Below, Morales was shouting over the comms, his voice cracking with static and disbelief. "Overwatch, do you copy? Identify yourself. Who the hell are you?" He was shouting toward the ridge now, as if the mountain itself could answer. Cross almost smiled. She had no intention of replying. Heroes don't announce themselves. They arrive, do the work, and vanish before the echo knows their name. Through the haze, she saw new shapes moving on the far side, reinforcements drawn in by the blast, cautious but determined. They were smarter now, spreading wide, avoiding open ground. Cross wiped her scope clean, but the dust kept settling back. Her hands were shaking, her right eye swelling from debris. Every nerve screamed for rest, but there was no space for pain. Pain was luxury. Morales' squad had reached the hut, securing the position Cross had cleared earlier. The wounded were being pulled into what little shade the ruins offered. The radio was alive again, fragments of orders from command trying to make sense of the chaos. Morales ignored it. "We hold here," he said, voice low, focused. "Whoever's up there, she bought us this chance. We make it count." Cross could hear none of it. She was recalculating everything: wind shift, sun angle, ammo count. 19 rounds left. 19 promises. The enemy had flanked lower, trying to surround the hut from the west. From her vantage, she could only see their movement when they broke formation, crawling through a cluster of burned trees that looked like bones. She waited until one of them raised his rifle. Then she took him.
The others froze, but not for long. They began firing blindly toward her ridge, bullets cracking across stone like angry sparks. She didn't move. She waited for the reload pause, counted to 3, then took the second. The valley was alive again, every sound sharpened by desperation. A sniper's war isn't measured in bullets. It's measured in how long silence can last before chaos returns. She felt her shoulder give slightly as she fired again, a deep bruising pain that spread through her ribs. Her rifle was hot enough to burn. The next shot jammed, bolt refusing to close. She cursed under her breath, stripped the chamber, and checked the casing. Warped metal, overheated. She tore off her glove, grabbed the barrel directly, and hissed at the heat as she realigned the feed. The metal burned her palm, but she didn't let go. Down below, Morales' men began counterfiring, taking advantage of every shot she gave them. They couldn't see her, but they could feel her guiding the rhythm of the fight. Every time she fired, they advanced. Every time she went silent, they took cover. The valley had become a conversation between those who believed and the one who refused to give up. The enemy regrouped again, this time moving behind the ridge to her north, her blind spot. She shifted, but her left leg was numb, pinned under a splintered rock that had fallen during the earlier blast. She pulled at it, teeth clenched, until pain flashed white behind her eyes. The leg moved, but barely. She forced herself up on one elbow and turned her rifle. Through the wavering heat, she saw a shadow climbing toward her, slow, deliberate, determined. Cross's rifle was still jammed, her leg bleeding, and the enemy sniper she'd wounded earlier was coming for her on foot. For the first time that day, the quiet she had created no longer felt like peace. It felt like a countdown. The ridge no longer felt like stone. It felt alive, trembling beneath her, as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. Cross lay half buried in the grit, one leg twisted under a fallen slab, her palm blistered from the barrel's heat. The rifle was silent beside her, its chamber jammed and body coated in a fine layer of blood and dust. Every muscle in her body screamed to move, but she knew movement would only make the approaching footsteps faster. Somewhere below the ridgeline, gravel shifted. The sound was faint, but certain. Measured steps, not the erratic shuffle of an amateur. The other sniper was closing in, slow and precise, using terrain like a memory. He was wounded, she could tell by the uneven rhythm of his approach, but not enough to make him cautious. Cross reached for her sidearm, fingers clumsy from the tremor running through her arm. It slipped once, clattering softly against the rock. The sound echoed farther than it should have. She froze, breathing shallowly, waiting to hear if the noise had brought her a visitor. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, low, almost conversational, carried across the distance. "You cost me a good arm," he said, the accent thick with fatigue, but steady enough to mean danger. "I came to return the favor." Cross didn't answer. Talking was noise. Noise invited calculation. She used the silence instead, measuring the direction of the voice. 40 meters, maybe less. The sun was lowering now, and the light shifted from white to gold, slicing shadows into the rock like veins of darkness. If he reached the ridge first, she'd lose line of sight forever. She forced her right leg to push against the stone, dragging herself a few inches toward the rifle. Pain flared up her spine, but it was distant. Pain had become background noise long ago. The enemy fired once into the air, not to hit her, but to listen for echo. The shot cracked, rolled, and came back delayed. Confirmation. She knew the trick. He had range now. In a sniper's world, silence isn't peace. It's permission to decide who breathes next. She felt for the bolt, fingers bleeding as they pried against the jam. It resisted. She tried again, twisting the rifle sideways and slamming it once against the rock. The metal slapped free with a cough of dust and heat. The rifle was alive again, if only barely. Her breathing slowed. The valley below glowed faintly under the dying sun. Her seals still alive, still fighting because she'd refused to stop. That thought alone kept her from fading. The footsteps began again. She could almost feel his breath between the pauses, hear the scrape of fabric against stone, the grunt of someone who knew the next shot would be personal. Cross shifted the rifle, angling toward the path leading up to her position. The sun's reflection off her scope was a risk, but she needed to see him first. Through the glass, the slope swam in gold and shadow. Nothing. Then movement. A dark shape crouched low, using a fallen boulder for cover. She waited for him to make the mistake every hunter makes: curiosity. He leaned, just enough for light to touch his face. Cross fired.
The recoil ripped through her injured arm. The bullet hit the rock, close enough to kiss skin but not bone. He ducked, rolling sideways, firing blind in her direction. One shot tore through her shoulder, spinning her halfway around before she caught herself on the rifle. The pain came late, searing and sharp, cutting through the numbness that had held her together all day. She pressed her hand over the wound, blood seeping between her fingers. The ridge tilted. She refused to fall. He was closer now, 20 meters, maybe less. His silhouette rose from the smoke, tall, deliberate, rifle cradled like an extension of his body. Cross dragged herself backward, using the rifle barrel as leverage, the world narrowing to the rhythm of her heartbeat. She could smell the oil on his weapon now. The next breath would decide everything. When two ghosts meet on a battlefield, only one gets to vanish again. She rolled onto her side, lining the scope with instinct more than precision.
Her vision doubled. She blinked the world back into one. The crosshair steadied over a patch of shadow where his chest should be. He fired first. The round struck the stone beside her head, showering her with splinters. She didn't flinch. She exhaled and pulled the trigger at the same moment his second shot left the barrel. The sound merged, one violent single heartbeat of thunder. Then silence. For a long time, neither moved. The smoke drifted upward in thin ribbons, dissolving into the evening light. Cross blinked once, twice, and saw him slump forward, rifle sliding from his grip. The echo of his shot died somewhere deep in the valley. Her ears rang, and her shoulder screamed, but the ridge was hers again. The valley below remained unaware of the duel that had decided their survival. She leaned her head back against the stone, eyes tracing the fading horizon. The light had turned copper now, dust rising like fog between the hills. It was beautiful, in a brutal way. The radio at her belt crackled again, louder this time, cutting through the haze. Overwatch, respond. We see movement near your position. Identify yourself or we fire. Cross looked toward the sky, toward the distant shimmer of aircraft wings approaching the valley, and realized command was finally here, but they didn't know who they were aiming at. The first thing Cross noticed wasn't the helicopters, it was the wind they carried. It came in violent gusts that scattered ash from the ridge and bent the smoke into spirals. The valley below flickered under their shadows as two gunships broke through the haze, rotors carving sunlight into shards. For a heartbeat, she let herself believe it was over, that rescue had finally arrived. Then the radio hissed to life beside her. Unidentified heat signature on West Ridge. No friendlies reported in the AO. Preparing strike confirmation.
Cross blinked, disbelief giving way to grim irony. She was the signature. To command, she was just a hostile shape in the mountains, one more target to erase before sunset. She tried to answer, pressing the transmit key on her radio, but only static came through. The antenna had snapped in the firefight. She glanced down at the flare clipped to her vest. Red was gone. Only green remained, the universal mark for danger. Perfect, she muttered, breath shallow. Below, Morales heard the same transmission. Negative, he shouted into his mic, running to higher ground. Overwatch is friendly, she's ours. But the signal kept breaking, eaten alive by the noise of engines and interference. Up above, the gunships were already banking, their sensors locking on to the single heat source that hadn't moved for hours. Cross forced herself upright. Her wounded leg protested, her shoulder burned, but she managed to crawl toward the edge of the ridge. The flare refused to ignite when she twisted it. The igniter clicked. Nothing. Dust had jammed it solid. She hit it against a rock, once, twice, until the casing cracked. Still nothing. Then the laser designator touched the stone beside her, a trembling dot of red that crept closer to her chest. Sometimes rescue arrives dressed like the enemy you've been fighting all day. She stared at the empty sky, calculating the seconds she had left. The gunships descended, engines screaming as the valley filled with turbulence. Morales and his men waved their arms, firing tracer rounds into the air, trying to draw attention. It wasn't enough. The pilots saw only her, a single armed figure on a hostile ridge. Cross leaned back against the stone, exhaustion softening everything around her. The sun was setting now, gold light bleeding through the dust. If this was how it ended, she could accept it. They would live. That was enough. Then a new voice cut through the static, deep, deliberate, unmistakably in command. Hold fire. Repeat. Hold all fire. Visual confirmation inbound. The sound of the turbines shifted. The gunships peeled off, circling wide as the air grew still again. Cross exhaled, every muscle trembling with relief. She let the flare drop from her hand and slumped against the ridge, eyes half closed, heartbeat slowing to something almost human. Minutes later, figures appeared climbing toward her, Morales and 2 SEALs, their silhouettes haloed in the dust. They reached her position, finding her half-conscious beside the rifle that had rewritten the day. Morales crouched, studying her face. You're the one who... He stopped, shaking his head as if the words refused to make sense. She tried to speak, but only managed a rasp of air. Morales pressed his hand against her shoulder, applying pressure to the wound. "Command, this is Breakwater 1. Target identified. Overwatch is friendly. I repeat, friendly."
Sometimes the difference between a savior and a threat is just who speaks first. The medevac arrived with the last light. Its downdraft whipped dust through the valley, lifting small clouds of debris that sparkled like embers. Morales stayed by her side as the medics worked, holding the broken flare in his free hand. "You bought us this," he said quietly. "All of it." Cross's eyes opened, tired but steady. "You held the line. That's all that mattered." They lifted her onto the stretcher. The sky above had turned a deep, bruised orange, the day finally surrendering to night. As the helicopter rose, Cross looked down at the valley, the craters, the burnt tracks, the small figures moving among them like survivors of a storm. For a moment, peace seemed possible. Then she saw movement on the far ridge, a silhouette limping through the smoke, dragging a rifle. The enemy sniper, alive, watching her leave. The mountain had gone quiet, but the silence didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like a promise, one that hadn't been settled yet. Down in the valley, Morales' team worked through the wreckage, collecting what they could, marking the fallen. Each crater told a story only Cross could have written. When command asked for her report, Morales simply said, "She was never ours to command." Far above in a field hospital miles from the front, Cross woke to the rhythmic beep of monitors and the smell of antiseptic replacing gunpowder. Her shoulder was bandaged, her leg bound tight. Through the open tent flap, she could see the horizon, the same ridge, distant and small, lit by moonlight like a ghost of itself. A young medic adjusted her IV. "They said you saved 24 men," he murmured. Cross didn't answer. Numbers had never meant much to her. She turned her head toward the window, listening to the wind moving through the canvas. It sounded almost like the valley breathing again. Some battles end when the shooting stops. Others keep echoing until the silence finally understands them. She reached for the small metal tag hanging from her neck, scratched, faded, almost unreadable. It wasn't her rank or her name that mattered. It was the weight of it, the proof that she had belonged to something once. Outside, another helicopter rose into the night, its lights tracing a line across the dark sky. Cross watched until it disappeared, then closed her eyes. The mountain would heal, the men would go home, and the silence she had created would keep watch a little longer, guarding a valley that now remembered her name.